In the silent depths of the earth, where light has never touched and air grows thin, some people chase the unknown not for fame, but for the thrill of discovery. Beneath our feet, entire worlds exist. Twisting tunnels, ancient rivers, vast chambers swallowed by stone. For some, caving is an escape. For others, it's a calling. But in these underground realms, mistakes can become fatal. Because once you're down there, the earth doesn't care who you are. In 1959, a promising 20-year-old student named Neil Moss ventured into the Peak District of England, drawn to the depths of a cave ominously named Peak Cavern, known by locals as the Devil's Arse. It's a name earned not from myth, but from the echoing groans the cave produces after heavy rains. Beneath its theatrical mouth lies a warren of twisting tunnels and vertical shafts, one of which, the EM shaft, was especially tight, deep, and rarely explored. Moss was not a reckless thrill seeker. He was young, bright, and passionate about caving. That March, he led a small expedition into Peak Cavern with one goal: to descend the narrow EM shaft and explore the mysterious space below. He had a rope, a harness, and years of experience. What he didn't have was a full picture of what lay beneath the surface and how unforgiving that space could become. The EM shaft was about 75 feet deep, tapering as it went, lined with wet limestone and unstable mud. As Moss descended, he began to notice the space narrowing. It wasn't unusual. Many cavers squeezed through tight passages. But around 30 feet down, he realized he was in serious trouble. His shoulders were wedged, the mud was thick. The more he struggled, the deeper he slipped, wedging himself tighter and tighter between the walls. Above ground, his team quickly understood something was wrong. Moss wasn't responding clearly, and his rope wasn't moving. By the time they reached the shaft entrance, they found him pinned, his body stuck in a vertical fissure, surrounded by slick mud and stone. It was a position no human was meant to fit into, and it would become one of the most heartbreaking caving disasters the UK had ever seen. What began as a hopeful cave expedition turned into a race against time. Local rescue teams were summoned, along with volunteer cavers, miners, and engineers. EM shaft's structure presented a nightmare. A near-vertical funnel just wide enough for a slim adult to descend, but nearly impossible to navigate with equipment. Even the oxygen supply was a challenge. Rescuers inserted a hose to keep Neil breathing, and volunteers attempted to feed him glucose and water through tubes. For hours, they talked to him, encouraged him, reassured him, but every minute passed with growing dread. The shaft walls were dangerous. Any movement could dislodge rocks and mud, burying Neil alive. Still, rescuers tried everything. They dug by hand. They chiseled the limestone. They pulled on his rope gently, trying not to cause injury. A brave volunteer named Bob Leakey was lowered headfirst into the shaft, hoping to chip away the rock and free the young man. He barely made it out alive, exhausted, suffocating, and traumatized. Time worked against them. Neil remained trapped, conscious but fading. His breathing became labored. Toxic gases, carbon dioxide mostly, were building up inside the shaft. Despite the oxygen hose, the environment was turning deadly. At one point, Neil asked rescuers to tell his mother he loved her. It was clear he knew the odds were slipping away. Efforts continued non-stop for more than 48 hours. The shaft was too tight for tools, too unstable for aggressive digging. The mud acted like quicksand, locking him in tighter with every twitch. Medical experts at the scene feared he was developing crush syndrome, a potentially fatal condition where prolonged compression shuts down organ function. Rescuers rotated shifts, hoping someone would figure out a miracle. But miracles don't come easily underground. On the third day, the line went quiet. Neil had stopped breathing. There was no pulse. The rescue became a recovery. His father, devastated and present throughout, made a gut-wrenching decision. No more lives would be risked to bring his son's body back. The shaft would be sealed. Neil Moss would be buried right where he died. Sealing the shaft was an act of both mercy and resignation. EM shaft was filled with rocks and cement, entombing the young man within the earth he had tried to explore. News of the tragedy gripped Britain. Neil Moss wasn't a celebrity. He wasn't famous, but his story struck a chord. A bright student with a love for discovery, lost in a place that most people would never dare to enter. His death wasn't quick or cinematic. It was slow, cold, trapped. It haunted the rescuers who tried to save him, many of whom later described the incident as the most psychologically scarring event of their lives. The tragedy sparked widespread discussions about cave safety. Caving clubs across the UK adopted stricter protocols, and the British Cave Rescue Council improved coordination and communication practices. But Neil's death also marked a sobering reality. Some parts of the Earth are not meant to be conquered. Peak Cavern still draws visitors today. Tourists walk through its large entrance chamber, marveling at its echoing roof and flowing water. But few know that deeper inside lies a sealed tomb, hidden behind layers of rock and time. The name Eam Shaft is still spoken among cavers with reverence and dread. Neil Moss became a part of the cave itself, not just in death but in legacy. For those who venture into the underground today, his story serves as a reminder, not of failure, but of the fine line between courage and risk. In the pursuit of discovery, the Earth can give up secrets or take them with her. Neil Moss chased knowledge into the darkness, and in that silence, his story still echoes. They called it the Devil's Arse, Peak Cavern in Derbyshire. That's not a nickname made for laughs. It's a warning, because once you enter, you're stepping into a world where the line between thrill and terror disappears in the dark. It was 1959 when Neil Moss, a bright and ambitious 20-year-old Oxford undergraduate, entered that world for what was supposed to be just another exciting day of caving. But what followed would become one of the most chilling cave tragedies ever recorded in the UK. Neil wasn't a reckless daredevil. He was intelligent, physically fit, and had some experience with caving. But that day, the team decided to explore a narrow vertical shaft deep inside the system, one that twisted downward like a cruel spiral, just barely wide enough for a human body. And Neil, eager and confident, volunteered to descend. He had a rope, his helmet, and a belief that everything was under control. But the shaft was tighter than expected, filled with unstable, crumbly rock and loose sediment. As Neil descended, the walls began to press in. The rope jammed, and then he was stuck, wedged in place about 150 feet below the surface, in a vertical chimney just 14 inches wide. Not standing, not sitting, just hanging there, immobile, in pitch-black silence. The rescuers worked around the clock. Volunteers and professional cavers descended with equipment and ropes, risking their own lives to reach Neil. They even pumped oxygen down the shaft to keep him breathing. For hours, he remained calm, reassuring the team that he was okay, that he could hang on. His voice, eerily composed, echoed up to the rescuers. "I'll be all right. I just can't move." But gravity and time are merciless in tight spaces. The more he struggled, the deeper he slipped into the rock. Exhaust fumes from machinery above began seeping downward. Oxygen levels dropped, his breathing slowed. And then, silence. The moment Neil stopped responding, hope collapsed. It was impossible to pull him out without dislodging the rock and risking more deaths. His father, heartbroken, made the unthinkable decision to stop the rescue attempt and leave his son's body sealed within the earth. The shaft was filled with stones and cement, and Neil's grave became part of the cave forever. To this day, his story is retold in hushed tones by cavers who know exactly how unforgiving these underground labyrinths can be. There's a memorial plaque placed near the entrance of the shaft in Peak Cavern, and it reads simply, "In memory of Neil Moss, who died here doing what he loved." But behind that simple statement is a haunting truth. Even passion and preparation can't protect you when the earth decides to tighten its grip. Neil's story is a sobering reminder that underground, every inch matters. That once you descend into darkness, you better be sure you can come back out. If there's one cave that changed how America sees underground exploration, it's Nutty Putty. Located just outside Salt Lake City, Utah, it wasn't the largest, deepest, or most complex cave, but it was tight, extremely tight. A winding network of twisty limestone corridors and claustrophobic passageways that could feel more like crawling through a birth canal than an adventure. And it was in one of these brutal crevices in 2009 that 26-year-old John Edward Jones met an unimaginable fate. John was no amateur. He had grown up exploring caves with his family, and he was deeply familiar with the risks. Married, with a 1-year-old daughter, and another baby on the way, he had returned to Utah for Thanksgiving and decided to revisit the cave with friends and his younger brother. It was meant to be a nostalgic night of exploration, one last crawl before heading back to real life. But around 8 p.m., deep inside Nutty Putty, John mistook one narrow tunnel for another. He believed he was entering the birth canal, a tight but navigable squeeze that thousands had passed through before. But it wasn't. It was an uncharted passage, far narrower and more dangerous. As he pushed forward head first, he suddenly found himself stuck upside down in a vertical shaft just 10 inches wide and 18 inches high. That's smaller than a microwave. And worse, gravity was now pulling all his body weight down into his chest, compressing his lungs and heart. At first, he tried to wriggle free, but the effort only made it worse. He was now wedged 100 feet below the surface, and no one could get to him easily. The rescue team arrived quickly, bringing ropes, pulleys, and mechanical winches. They tried everything, from tying him to a pulley system to drilling anchors into the rock. But every time they pulled, the friction of the cave walls pushed him harder into the stone. Upside down for hours, John began suffering from something called positional asphyxia. That's when gravity prevents your lungs from expanding properly. Blood pools in the head, organs swell, and pain becomes unbearable. He stayed conscious, remarkably, for more than 20 hours. He prayed. He talked to rescuers. He told them to tell his wife and kids that he loved them. But eventually, his breathing slowed. His heart couldn't take it. In the early morning hours, John died, and like Neil Moss, his body couldn't be recovered. The risk to rescuers was too great. Instead, Nutty Putty Cave was permanently sealed. Filled with concrete, it is now a tomb, his final resting place. The story of John Edward Jones spread like wildfire. It wasn't just a tragedy, it was a gut punch to anyone who ever thought of caving as a casual hobby. It showed how quickly confidence and experience can be overpowered by terrain, how easy it is to make a wrong turn that has no way out. Today, Nutty Putty is no longer on any map. The entrance is blocked, no one can enter, but every now and then, photos and dramatizations circulate online, bringing back that eerie, heartbreaking image of a man trapped, alone, in the dark, calling out for help that never fully arrived. It's one of the most claustrophobic, terrifying, and devastating caving accidents in modern memory. Caves are beautiful, but they don't forgive mistakes. Neil Moss, John Edward Jones, and Agnes Malloch each entered with passion, but left behind stories that remind us how quickly wonder can turn to tragedy. If these stories moved you, share this video and subscribe for more true accounts of adventure, courage, and consequence.